See, there's something within us that wants to leave a legacy. But here's the thing you need to know is if God asks you to do something, don't look at the size of the job, look at the size of your God who asked you to do it. See, he laid down his life for you, so that tells me that you're not worthless, you are worthy. And this is what he wants to rewrite into your story. That reality impacts everything.
Welcome to week 5 of Say What. We're looking at these shocking statements that Jesus says all throughout kind of his ministry career and how these shocking statements impacted the people that he said them to, but then also how it impacts us. And I'm excited as we dive into this conversation today and that I talked about this weekend. Conversation about counting the cost. I kind of use this illustration as summer arrives. I don't know if you're like me, but I face a ton of random little expenses that I look at, especially with all the outdoor activities that I could be doing or all the outdoor needs. Like there's just landscaping and there's grass seeding and there's outdoor furniture and outdoor toys and all these little things that I look at. I'm like, I should buy that, or I could buy that, or I need to fix that patch of dead grass in my house. And I look at everything, I'm like, and I literally do this. I count the costs. I start to go, man, could I let that slide for another year? Could I let that thing be for another year? Or do I have to deal with it right now? Do I need to invest that expense right now to fix that and to make it right? And so I look at very literally counting the cost of everything that I'm facing, at least with all those expenses that I'm looking at, and trying to figure out, is it worth investing in it? And what we're talking about this weekend was this whole idea of when it comes to God, we have to wrestle through that same question: is my trust in God in an area of my life? What might it cost me? Following God, what could that cost me? Me taking a step of faith, what could that cost me? Obeying God in an area where you know He's calling you to go, what could that cost me? And we all sit there going, all right, man, am I willing to pay or spend or count the cost of what this is really going to cost me? The way that Jesus sets this up in Luke chapter 14, verse 25, is he says this. He's talking to a large crowd, and it's such a crazy, shocking statement. He says, if anyone wants to come after me and doesn't hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. I can just imagine that when Jesus says this to his disciples, like their jaws drop and they're just like, what are you saying? I mean, just think about this. Jesus, the one who is like, he's a friend to the sinners. He is God incarnate. He is love. He loves the most, the people who are most unlovely. And here, in the most logical relationships that you would show love to, he's saying, hey, you gotta hate them. Hate your mom, your dad. I can imagine all the disciples being like, Jesus, change the subject, change it quickly, heal someone, and talk about, them eating your flesh and drinking your blood. I mean, attack the Pharisees. Do anything other than attack family, because that's a bad idea and a bad thing to go after. And I can imagine everyone was totally shocked. So what does it mean for us? Does he really want us to hate our family members? Hate even ourselves? No, he doesn't. So what's he talking about? There's a couple main reasons or meanings to what he was saying when he said hate. But there's one that I want to land on here just for our purposes. And it's this word hate in the Bible often expresses priority and preference, not emotional hatred. So like in the book of Malachi, when it says Jacob I hated and Esau I loved, and talking about God doesn't hate Esau. Actually, God blessed Esau in huge ways. What it's talking about in that is actually priority and preference due to Jacob's obedience. And I likened it this way. My love relationship with my wife, because I love her so much, I have such preference for her over every other woman on the planet. It might even appear like I don't care about any other woman. That's not any other woman on the planet. It doesn't mean I treat anyone poorly. That's not it at all. But in comparison for my love for my wife to every other woman, it might seem like hatred. It's that far apart, but it's that far in terms of preference for her, priority in my life for her. And in the same way, Jesus is actually kind of leaning into the same idea, is that our love for God has to be of such priority and preference over even our close family love relationships, that we make him first. And then he goes into verse 27 where he says, if you don't carry your cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. And that was a super shocking statement, because the cross was not a normalized image of like salvation and hope and freedom that we see it as, but instead it was an image of really a death sentence. It would be like having like an electric chair off in the corner of our auditorium for worship, in our place of worship. It would be crazy. People would be like, why do you have that there? That's grotesque. That's nasty. Like, that is so messed up. And that's what he's leaning into is, listen, the person who's going to follow me, they are literally carrying their own cross. They are saying death to myself, death to my preferences, death to my priorities in life, and instead I'm making God my preference, God my priorities, His way first. In verse 28 to 32, he gives a couple examples, illustrations to help the listeners understand what this kind of counting the cost looks like. He talks about building a tower. He says no one would start building a tower if you didn't kind of evaluate, can you finish the tower? Do you have enough resources to finish the tower? He talks about a king going to war. So if he has 10,000 troops and he's going against a king who has 20,000 troops, he's going to count the cost and really evaluate, can I win this battle? Or do I need to send a delegation in advance to create a peace treaty? And the whole point is a wise person will count the costs. They're going to figure out, what is this going to cost me to get the win? And in verse 33, he says this, in the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. And I talked about this Greek word that gets translated as give up, everything you have, as it could be translated as to literally say goodbye or to bid farewell, which is really interesting. It's this idea of, can I kind of say goodbye to, or bid farewell to my preferences, my priorities in life, and make Him first. It's a move of the heart to bid farewell to the many things in our lives that are begging to be first. I remember in my life, this is just an example, I remember God once asking me, I was away on just kind of a personal, private, spiritual retreat, and I was just doing business with God. And I remember the Holy Spirit just really asked me a few really hard questions that weekend. But He asked me, am I enough if I took away your voice? And I thought to myself, well, this is like what I use to, preach for you, to serve in ministry. Like, this is what you use in me. Like, why would you take that away? And the Lord was not really pressing me saying, I want to take it away. It was really this idea of am I enough? Is relationship with me enough? Am I priority first? Or do you only like serving, or do you only love me because you can serve me and be used in powerful ways by me? Like, do you love the gifts that I've given you more than the giver of the gifts? And that was like, I remember I had this like reckoning moment with the Lord where, I was in tears and I was working things out with the Lord and going, all right, God, kind of having to surrender, bid farewell to my voice, which is crazy because the Lord didn't take it from me, but having to kind of go through the mental steps of saying, God, you can have that. And if you take it away, you'll be enough in my life. I'll love you and you'll be my priority. You'll be my preference. You are my all in all. And that's a really hard thing for all of us to go through and process through, but that's what Jesus is really pressing in this whole conversation. My final observation out of this was this: the person who's counting the cost of the building and going to war and things like that, they're calculating the cost for a successful finish. They're calculating the cost for a win, ultimately. Like, they're not going to go after it until they can finish the tower. They're not going to war until they can win the battle or walk out with the peace treaty on the other side. And my whole point was this. When we follow Christ, there might be a high cost, but you actually get the win. We get the win in the end. That's the whole point. And I talked I read a handful of short one-liner kind of stories from those who were baptized this weekend, of their stories of how they've seen God bring the win in their life. And it was just so cool to see people get baptized this weekend and to see little glimpses of their story and how God is winning in their lives. And I guess I would encourage you in your small groups today, maybe you too could share something like this. Share this. What has following Christ cost you? But then also, where has he brought the win in your life? Like, where would you say, yeah, it cost me this? Maybe it was a friendship that you had to walk away from, or a business deal you had to walk away from, or a position in business. But then where was it that God brought you the win? I also shared or asked some things, or this question, that are there some things that you haven't said goodbye to? Like, I trust you, God, but if I'm honest, I'm holding on to this thing. You're still giving preference or priority to these things. Are there things in your life that you've held priority, or that they've held priority in your life? Perhaps in your actions, in your behaviors, in your finances, in your time, in your commitments, etc. So what might you need to bid farewell to that's actually been receiving preference and priority over God? Enjoy your conversations this week as you dive into this passage in Luke, and we'll talk to you guys next week.